morning and welcome to Daybreak. You're watching it live on A News and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump hints Iran talks could resume this week as US port blockade continues. Israel and Lebanon hold first direct talks since 1993 with calls for a ceasefire. And Israeli strikes kill 11 in Gaza, including 2 children, medics say. Now, tensions remain high between the United States and Iran after the collapse of recent talks in Islamabad and the start of a US naval blockade. Washington says diplomacy could resume soon, but both sides acknowledge deep mistrust. Meanwhile, the obstruction of its ports has already brought Iran's sea trade to a halt.
US President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that talks with Iran could resume in Pakistan within the next 2 days. This follows the collapse of weekend negotiations, which led Washington to impose a blockade on Iranian ports. US Vice President J.D. Vance also pointed to progress, but said deep mistrust between Washington and Tehran would take time to overcome.
Look, honestly, after 49 years, there's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. And I know the President of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. So you never know, though.
He added that Iranian negotiators appeared willing to reach an agreement and said he felt very good about where we are. Iran has not yet responded to Trump's remarks. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said the country remains compliant with international law and highlighted growing instability in the Middle East.
There is now a problem in the Persian Gulf, and the world has been thrown into turmoil. This has had an impact across the world. People are dissatisfied and have raised their voices. But we ourselves are in the midst of this turmoil, and despite all these pressures, our work is progressing properly.
The comments come as the US military said no ships had passed through the American-enforced blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas in the first 24 hours of the operation. Late on Tuesday, it said US forces had completely halted maritime trade into and out of Iran.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the first and main story involving Iran and Lebanon, and it's on CNN's website. Trump hints US-Iran talks could resume this week. So as you heard in our report, Donald Trump has been speaking to reporters saying that it's likely in the next 2 days talks of hopefully an agreement coming to bring the war to an end could take place. Now, it's part of Pakistan's army's chief mediator that US President Trump has actually very much congratulated and said that the Army Chief Field Marshal Asmir Munir was doing a great job. President Donald Trump actually told New York Post reporter yesterday in regards to it, saying that ceasefire talks could actually start again this week. So we'll definitely keep you updated in regards to that, as well as what's going on with the blockade taking place in Iran. Now, a Pakistani official said on Tuesday that he had expected to restart soon, but it may take a bit longer than 2 days than what Trump has suggested. So Islamabad is actually racing to make sure they meet a date that provides enough time for negotiations before the 2-week ceasefire ends next Wednesday on the 22nd of April. And just to add, oil prices have actually now continued to fall since Trump announced that peace talks between the two could help, and it's actually eased concerns about further disruptions to energy supply. So we'll make sure that we keep you updated in relation to that. Now let's quickly turn to what's going on in Lebanon. We know that Lebanon and Israeli officials held their first diplomatic talks in over 3 decades in Washington on Tuesday to end the fighting between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah group. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who mediated the talks, said it was a historic opportunity to end Hezbollah's influence. And as you can see, they've taken like a family photo here of both sides coming together, and the U.S. Marco Rubio in the middle there in order to kind of mediate these peace talks. Now, Israel wants to disarm all non-state terror groups, which is in reference to Hezbollah. However, Lebanon has called for a ceasefire and for measures to address its humanitarian crisis. We've been reporting a number of Israeli strikes in the capital and the amount of people that it has impacted, not to mention the lives lost due to the ongoing fighting there. Now, the two countries do not have diplomatic relations, and the last direct high-level talks between them was taking place in 1993. As I mentioned, and then we are Vance there was also part of these talks. Now, over 2,000 people have been killed since Israeli military operations in Lebanon began on the 2nd of March in regards to a joint Israel and US attack on Iran. Now, let's go to the next story making headlines today, and that's on Al Jazeera. In regards to Spain, and the Spanish government has approved an amnesty program for undocumented immigrants. Now, this law allows them to integrate migrants to integrate formally into the workforce. And Prime Minister here, Pedro Sanchez, that you can see on screen, has described his government's decision as both an act of justice and necessity for Spain. In a letter that he posted on social media, he said the mass legislation sought to acknowledge the reality of nearly 500,000 people who already form part of our everyday lives, is what he said. Spain's conservative opposition People's Party, however, has pledged to attempt to block the legislation, which it said rewards illegal migrants and would encourage more to come to the country. Now, the government's plan will offer a 1-year renewable residence permit to undocumented migrants to be eligible applicants. But to be eligible applicants, you need to prove a few things. One, that you've spent at least 5 months living in Spain and have a clean criminal record. And they have between 16th of April and the end of June to apply for that. Now, Sanchez says that migrants help to build the rich and open, diverse Spain that they are all accustomed to now, and wants to make sure that undocumented migrants are now part of the legal are able to have legal status in the country. And we will report about this later on in the programme, just to hear responses from certain communities that this will be benefiting. Now, let's go to the next story, which is on the BBC, and that's in regards to the Pope. And his his tour through the continent of Africa, and in particular his next visit will be to Cameroon. So Cameroon separatists to pause fighting ahead of the Pope visit. Now, Anglophone separatists in Cameroon have announced a period of safe travel passage and stop fighting ahead of Pope Leo XIV's visit to the region this week. Now, the 3-day measure was in recognition of the profound spiritual importance of his visit, which starts today, and the need to safeguard civilian life in the country. Now, a statement from the Unity Alliance, which actually brings the two groups together, so that they will facilitate the movement of celebrating the visit. The government is yet to comment on that, but just to add, a near decade of violence in the English-speaking region has left at least 6,000 dead and many more forced from their homes. And just lastly on this particular story, peace is one of the major themes of the Pope's visit. So this is already having an impact in Cameroon, especially between these two groups, making sure that they want to stop their fighting in order for a safe and peaceful passage for the Pope to visit Cameroon, as well as many other nations in the continent of Africa. Okay, now let's go to our next story, and that is on the Guardian website in relation to Rohingya, and about 250 missing after boat carrying Rohingya refugees capsizes in Andaman Sea. Now, this is a sad story, but just to report exactly what's going on here, it has been stated that 250 people are missing after a boat capsized, and Bangladeshi nationals were also in that boat, and that's according to United Nations refugee and migration agencies. Now, the trawler, which had departed from Bangladesh, was heading for Malaysia and reportedly sank due to heavy winds, rough seas and overcrowding. The Bangladesh Coast Guard told AFP news agencies one of its ships rescued 9 people from the vessel on the 9th of April. But it's actually unclear exactly how the boat capsized and what the actual details into how this took place. Now, thousands of Rohingya, Myanmar's persecuted Muslim minority, risk their lives every year fleeing repression and civil war in the country. And they actually travel by sea, often on makeshift boats, which is very dangerous, fleeing across the border into Bangladesh since a deadly crackdown in 2017. Now, the Rohingya, who are primarily Muslim, are denied any type of citizenship by the government of Myanmar, a Buddhist majority country. However, poor living conditions in Bangladesh is actually pushing them further away, and some have decided to actually continue precarious journeys on overcrowded vessels to Malaysia, which is a Buddhist country. So they're just trying to seek, a Muslim country, so they're just trying to seek as much refuge and peaceful living as much as they possibly can. But we'll give you more information on any updates that we get in regards to this story and any other survivors due to the capsizing of that boat. Right, well, that was your press roundup for now. I'm now going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. And we head first to Israel and Lebanon, who held a direct talk in Washington, D.C. in a meeting hosted by the United States. The discussions come in the middle of rising regional tensions and ongoing conflict, marking a notable attempt to open a path toward further negotiations.
The United States hosted rare direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in Washington, D.C., marking a significant diplomatic moment between two countries that have technically been at war for decades. The The meeting comes at a critical point in the Middle East crisis, just 1 week into a fragile ceasefire involving the United States, Israel and Iran. Chaired by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the talks brought together Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh. Israel is demanding the disarmament of Hezbollah and the dismantling of its infrastructure, while Lebanon is calling for an immediate ceasefire and urgent steps to address a worsening humanitarian crisis. Officials say the talks lasted more than 2 hours. The US State Department described the discussions as productive, with agreement to move toward direct negotiations. Rubio called the meeting a historic opportunity to address long-standing tensions.
We're very honored to be joined by two countries that the United States wants to have strong relations with, and we're obviously very happy to serve in this facilitating role. This is a historic opportunity. We understand we're working against decades of history and complexities that have led us to this unique moment. And the opportunity here, I know some of you are shouting questions about ceasefires. This is a lot more than just about that. This is about bringing a permanent end to 20 or 30 years of Hezbollah's influence in this part of the world, and not just the damage it's inflicted on Israel, the damage it's inflicted on the Lebanese people. We have to remember the Lebanese people are victims of Hezbollah.
Israel emphasized its security concerns.
We made it very clear that the security of our civilians is not up for negotiation. That is understood by the government of Joseph Aoun. And I must say, this was a victory for sanity, for responsibility, and for peace. Because the head of Hezbollah warned the government of Lebanon yesterday not to participate in these talks. And the government of Joseph Aoun bravely said no to Hezbollah. And this is the beginning of a very strong and fortified, consistent battle against Hezbollah. They are weakened as they've never been, and together we'll continue to rid the threat of this Iranian proxy, which is so malign and so malignant in the region.
Despite diplomatic progress, violence continues on the ground. A fire lit up the sky in Tyre following a reported Israeli strike. Lebanese authorities say dozens have been killed in recent attacks as tensions remain high.
Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip has killed at least 11 Palestinians on Tuesday, according to local officials. The attacks have deepened tensions despite an ongoing ceasefire deal. Among the dead were children, including a 3-year-old boy killed in a strike targeting a police vehicle in Gaza City, and another child killed in the north near Jabalia. Israel has not commented on all incidences. The violence continues, with both sides blaming each other for the escalation. Staying on the conflict in the Middle East, Italy has suspended the automatic renewal of its defence cooperation agreement with Israel. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni confirmed on Tuesday. Despite being one of Israel's strongest supporters in Europe, Meloni's government has recently criticised Israel's strikes in Lebanon. Speaking in Verona, Meloni said the decision reflects the current situation. The defence agreement, signed in 2003 and enforced since 2006, is subject to automatic renewal every 5 years. Israel's foreign ministry has not yet commented. Now staying in Europe, and French President Emmanuel Macron is set to host a video conference with EU leaders to advance a coordinated European approach to banning social media use by minors. The Elysee Palace says Thursday's meeting will include European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and representatives from Italy and the Netherlands, including as well as Ireland. The final list will be confirmed later. Officials say the talks aim to align countries' positions and push the European Commission to act alongside national governments. In the UK, a new push to reset ties with Brussels is reigniting debate over how Britain balances economic pragmatism with parliamentary control. But the plan is already drawing sharp political divisions within its borders. A News correspondent Zainab Faridze has more.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is preparing controversial new legislation that could allow the UK to adopt future EU laws without a full parliamentary vote each time. The proposal is designed to make it easier for Britain to align with European rules in key areas like food standards, carbon pricing and electricity trading as a part of a broader effort to reset relations with Brussels after Brexit. Under the plans, ministers would be able to introduce changes through so-called secondary legislation, a fast-track process that limits debate and scrutiny in Parliament. The government insists MPs and peers will still have a role in overseeing these decisions, but critics argue their influence would be significantly reduced. The move has triggered a strong opposition from both the Conservatives and Reform UK, who say it risks handing too much power to ministers and undermining parliamentary sovereignty. Supporters, however, argue closer alignment with the EU could cut trade barriers, lower costs and boost economic stability at a time of global uncertainty. Speaking in Parliament, the Prime Minister said the economic and security benefits of stronger ties with Europe are too big to ignore, pointing to recent global shocks, including conflict in the Middle East and ongoing economic pressures. The legislation is expected later this year and would underpin future agreements with the EU. But the plan is politically sensitive. Unlike before Brexit, the UK would be aligning with rules it no longer has a direct role in shaping. The government argues this is a pragmatic step forward. Opponents say it looks like a step back. Either way, the debate over Britain's post-Brexit future is far from over. Zainab Faridze, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
To Spain, and its government has recently approved plans to give legal status to 500,000 undocumented migrants. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez described the decision as both an act of justice and necessity, prompting emotional reactions from migrant communities set to benefit. Here's more.
Members of the Bangladeshi community in Barcelona have welcomed Spain's approval of a mass amnesty program aimed at regularizing hundreds of thousands of migrants. The initiative, a key part of Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's agenda, is designed to harness the economic benefits of migration as the country faces an aging population. Many migrants say the decision could transform their daily lives.
A lot of people is undocumented. They have no job, no house. Their life is very difficult. They can't live. That is why everyone is so happy.
It's more opportunity in immigrant. So thank you, Pedro Sanchez. Thank you, Spain.
Now that this government give me us this, we are so happy. Our without paper people, so happy now.
Applications are set to open later this week following the government's formal approval of the plan. Spain's population has grown to around 50 million, with roughly 10 million people born abroad, while estimates suggest more than 800,000 undocumented migrants are currently part of the workforce. The move pits Spain's left-wing coalition government against the centre-right People's Party, which is vowing to challenge the decree in the courts, not to mention the far-right Vox group, which wants the country's irregular immigrants deported.
Now let's turn to how some countries are moving to renewable energy as a key buffer against global energy shocks, as a new report urges governments to accelerate the shift away from fossil fuels.
A new policy advisory from the International Renewable Energy Agency says countries investing in renewables are showing greater resilience as the global energy crisis continues. From Spain and Portugal to China, India and Pakistan, clean energy is already reducing reliance on imported fuels and helping limit exposure to price volatility. The report highlights another year of record growth, with nearly 700 gigawatts of renewable capacity added globally in 2025. It also points to a major shift in costs, with more than 85% of new renewable power now cheaper than fossil fuel alternatives. And advances in battery storage mean renewable systems are increasingly able to deliver reliable power at lower cost than many fossil fuel plants. Director General Francesco La Camera says the current crisis underlines the strategic importance of accelerating clean energy and electrification. The warning comes as ongoing tensions in the Middle East continue to highlight the vulnerability of energy systems heavily dependent on oil and gas. Irina says the impact could extend beyond energy markets, affecting inflation and economic stability, particularly in more vulnerable economies. The agency is calling for faster deployment of renewables, alongside grid expansion, storage investment, and policies to shift energy demand. In the longer term, Irina says clear policy frameworks and sustained investment will be critical to building more secure and resilient energy systems.
To North America, and US Vice President J.D. Vance has jumped in on Donald Trump's feud, saying Pope Leo XIV should be careful when speaking on matters of theology. Vance was met with strong protests against the US's position to the war in Gaza. Here's more on that story.
So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm going to try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Now, to respond to this guy here, he said, I believe he said the administration supports a genocide in Gaza, and here's my response to that. When we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. You know who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. So if you want to complain about what happened in Gaza...
The US military have carried out a strike on a vessel in Eastern Pacific, killing 4 men on Tuesday. The killings mark the 4th US deadly strike in the past 4 days on vessels in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. US Southern Command announced the attack in a social media post alongside a video that showed a stationary boat with outboard engines being hit by a missile and exploding into a huge ball of flames. The strike comes as a day after the US military said that a strike also in the Eastern Pacific had killed 2 men. The Trump administration has been targeting vessels suspected of transporting narcotics with military strikes. To East Asia now, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Beijing and exchanged in-depth views on international and regional issues. Wang said that China and Russia should implement and promote the bilateral strategic partnership of coordination. Lavrov said Russia is willing to work with China to maintain close high-level exchanges and achieve mutual benefit. After the talks, the two sides signed the 2026 consultation plan of the foreign ministries of the two countries. Now to Sierra Leone, who has completed a 100-day drive to tackle waste, with young workers clearing Lumley Beach in Freetown to raise awareness and promote responsibility. Organisers are urging stricter anti-littering enforcement.
Sierra Leone has carried out a 100-day campaign aimed at tackling waste challenges in the West African nation. The initiative saw young workers clearing Lumley Beach in the capital, Freetown, in a bid to encourage citizens to take greater personal responsibility in addressing the problem. Organisers of the project, known as the Young Sustainability Initiative, are also calling on the government to enforce regulations to curb littering.
When waste is thrown on the streets, it eventually ends up in the sea during the rainy season. It blocks gutters and drainage systems and finally reaches the beach. So please, government, we need enforcement.
Funds raised through a GoFundMe campaign have enabled the initiative to provide resources for volunteers and install bins made from recycled tyres at key points along the beach. The collected waste is sorted and transported for processing as part of broader efforts to reduce flooding in the city.
When we collect it, we will then come and weigh it here, where we're standing, and then after weighing, we will transfer it to our facility. In our facility, we will then shred the plastic and then mix it with sand and stone to then produce building blocks to be used for construction.
According to the World Bank, Sierra Leone generates around 130,000 tonnes of plastic waste each year, but only about 5% is properly recycled by domestic companies. With changing consumption patterns and limited infrastructure, experts warn that the city faces a long-term challenge in managing waste as its population continues to grow.
Over to a quick break now. When I return, I'll take a look at the regional headlines and we'll be joined by a guest to further dig into some of those key stories. Don't go anywhere.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn over to the region for some of the key headlines, and we turn to Armenia in regards to what's just taken place there. Its foreign minister visit to Brussels underscores a steady deepening of Armenia's engagement with the EU. It marks closer ties with Europe, may serve as a means of diversifying its foreign policy and reducing dependency on traditional security partners. However, for Azerbaijan, the expanding EU footprint raises questions about balance, neutrality, and the long-term implications of external involvement in the region historically shaped by competing powers. Joining me now to understand what this all means is Hussein Sultanli, advisor at the Center of Analysis of International Relations. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
My first question in this is, can the European Union maintain a genuinely balanced role with deepening its partnership with Armenia?
That should definitely be the goal of the European Union, especially given its track record in the region, which hasn't always been balanced, unfortunately. The Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process is an entirely bilateral process. However, input from external actors is arguably, just as important, and we see that with the United States. So there is hope that the role that the United States is playing can serve as a model for other actors. And in this context, the European Union can definitely step up and support the process rather than, be a part of it as a separate actor, because as I mentioned, the peace process is entirely a bilateral one. The European Union needs to ensure that it uses its strengths to support the peace process, and its strengths are, aplenty. It's a financial power. It has other, types of power that it can use in this region. However, it needs to ensure that the basis of its engagement here is basically assisting the two countries rather than trying to drive the process in a certain direction, because the end goal, the ultimate direction, should be determined exclusively by the two countries here, Azerbaijan and Armenia. The European Union, however, has a big part to play in supporting them with various means, because it has those various means at its disposal.
And so, to what extent might Armenia's growing European interest reshape the negotiating dynamics it has with Azerbaijan, particularly if we look at the sensitive issues such as territorial integrity, connectivity, and security guarantees?
Well, if the peace process is to continue with the momentum that it has gained recently, Armenia should, ensure that none of its other relationships affect the peace process. The European Union is a particularly sensitive one, because in recent months we've seen, sometimes we have seen signs of, potential of Armenia-EU relations, impacting the peace process. For example, in December, the two sides, EU and Armenia, they adopted a strategic agenda on their partnership, on deepening their partnership, and there were elements there which, let's say, were not acceptable to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan made its position very clear at the highest possible level. We need to ensure that in the future these instances don't repeat, because there's a lot of momentum now at several levels, at the leadership level, at the civil society level, and at the economic level, and we need to ensure that Armenia and Azerbaijan's other relationships do not affect the peace process. And yes, as you correctly mentioned, the European Union is a particularly sensitive one, because there is already evidence of it affecting the peace process and raising eyebrows, and this was the case in December.
Yes, definitely, treading quite carefully just because of all of that. My next question really is in regards to, is the South Caucasus at risk of becoming an increasingly pronounced arena of geopolitical competition that could complicate rather than facilitate the peace process? You kind of touched upon it, but I just want to kind of delve a bit deeper into that.
That is always a possibility, I think, because at the end of the day, we don't know what will happen. However, I think the South Caucasus is in a good position to prevent that from happening. Here we have to mention Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is, in addition to working with Armenia, it's also developing strategic partnerships with several different actors, which is enabling it to sort of maintain a balance. It's not focusing exclusively on one direction. It's developing its relationship with the United States, with China. It's engaging in multilateral platforms and unilateral platforms. So I think Azerbaijan has kind of established itself as a regional leader. And when you have a regional leader that is able to, work in multiple directions, I think the risk of geopolitical competition taking over the regional agenda is immediately lower. However, that does not mean that it doesn't exist. And what I said in the previous answer, we have to make sure that both sides are ensuring that what they do on the outside does not affect the peace process, because the peace process is advancing, but it's still a sensitive and fragile process, and it needs to be treated carefully.
Yes. And how sustainable are civil society-driven peace initiatives then in the absence of parallel breakthroughs at the political level? And I think it's more looking at, obviously, the civil society, what's going on in Armenia, Azerbaijan, even if you wanted to touch on Georgia, but the peace initiatives, especially between the two countries, how parallel are the breakthroughs in relation to that?
Well, I think what's happening at the civil society level is essential, and I'm going to repeat the word momentum again, because we can see an occasional event, we can see an occasional conference, but when it keeps happening over a certain period of time, you know for sure that this is a process that's heading into a concrete direction. And only recently there was a meeting in Gabala, I think civil society processes have a big role to play, and they are definitely continuing, and they're continuing fast. There are clear goals. Whenever representatives of the process speak, they mention very clear goals. It's not just meetings, just to have discussions. It's actually meetings and discussions to agree on something, to reach a certain consensus, and that's crucial at the civil society level. And then, of course, the leadership level, the official level, is separate to that, but I think, as I said, a peace process is fragile, so it has to be supported in all the possible directions.
What do you think could actually harm that peace process? What could be, I don't know, normally it takes something very small to, gain momentum, as that word is currently being used, to actually fragment something that is going in the right direction, but could bring it back to square one, for example.
Well, what I think could harm the peace process is if one of the sides feels that its interests or its sort of objectives or its conditions are not being adhered to or respected. I think Azerbaijan has demonstrated a great track record of this. It extended its hand to Armenia, even though it was a victim of occupation, of territorial occupation, and I think. We just need to ensure, we need to wait a little bit longer and see whether Armenia is able to ensure that in all of its foreign policy activities and engagements, it also respects Azerbaijan's concerns and sensitive points. And the strategic agenda, which I mentioned in December, for example, was an example of the contrary. It wasn't exactly an example of Armenia listening to Azerbaijan's conditions and concerns. But again, the longer this goes on, the longer it goes on in a positive atmosphere, environment, the greater the chances are of those instances never happening again.
Yes, okay, well that sounds very positive in regards to that, and we know that Nikol Pashinyan is very much in agreement in making sure this peace process continues and a good relationship is continued to be reciprocated with Azerbaijan in relation to that. But could increased then EU engagement ultimately contribute to long-term stability, or might it inadvertently introduce new lines of division within the region? I guess it's the same thing of, the EU coming in, could it be a positive thing, or could it cause divisions within a region that needs to come together?
It definitely has the potential to create long-term stability, because as I said at the start, the EU has a lot to do here, because in previous years it wasn't necessarily creating or supporting the conditions for peace, because some of its initiatives weren't necessarily acceptable to the Azerbaijani side. This is well documented, and unfortunately sometimes we see a repeat of that. But EU-Azerbaijan relations are on their own developing positively now. There's this new renewed sense of optimism. There are more frequent contacts between the leadership of the Azerbaijan and the leadership of the political leadership, the foreign policy policy leadership of the EU. So I think that the EU definitely has the potential to support it, and the peace process is not just one dimension or one sphere. It's transport, it's logistics, it's energy, and in all of those the EU can act as a supporting act. For example, it's now actively trying to unify its approach to various different regions like the Black Sea, South Caucasus and Central Asian regions. And as long as there is tangible financial investment in support of the sort of political statements which the EU makes, which are also of course very positive, I think as long as that continues, there's definitely a chance for the EU to contribute to long-term stability.
Yes, and it's something that we know that Armenia is definitely much chasing and wanting to develop stronger ties with the EU and kind of push out Russia's influences within the South Caucasus. Do you think that's generally, are we seeing a change in guards in regards to seeing less of an influence with Russia and more of an influence with Western actors in this region?
Well, definitely, that's definitely the case, because as we know, the United States is playing a big role in the peace process. It's playing a big role in TRIP, in the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, and the kind of things that were announced in August and have happened since then. For example, the Vice President's visit to the region. These are things that have not really happened before or have not happened in recent history. So definitely, it does show that change. With regards to the EU, with regards to Armenia sort of diversifying its relationships, I think that's obviously Armenia's sovereign choice, and that has to be respected. Azerbaijan also has various different partnerships. Azerbaijan, though, is a unique case in the sense in that it doesn't affect one of its relationships. It doesn't allow, one of its relationships to affect other relationships, and that's key in ensuring that you have a balanced foreign policy approach. However, as I said, there's as long as Armenia's individual initiatives do not jeopardize the peace process, they're the country's sovereign choice, independent choice.
Okay, and finally, how should Azerbaijan adapt its own diplomatic and strategic response to changing regional environment in which the role of external actors, as we just mentioned before, particularly the EU, continues to expand?
Well, I think Azerbaijan, in my personal opinion, doesn't really need to adapt that much in that sense, because it's already proving that it can deal with a multi-dimensional sort of frameworks. It's developing its relationships with major powers. It's not just developing its relationships with smaller states or other states in the region. It's actually developing relationships with what we tend to describe as great powers, major powers. We can see that with China, with the United States. So I think Azerbaijan will continue the course that it has chosen, and time is proving that it's a successful course, because Azerbaijan is recognized globally as a reliable partner, whether that's in the energy sphere or in any other sphere. So I think Azerbaijan's diplomatic approach is, it's almost tailored to the potential of geopolitical competition influencing the regional reality. The country is well positioned to ensure that the region is protected from these tendencies.
Okay, wow, great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sultanli, for explaining that to our audience. That's been definitely beneficial this morning. Thank you. Now, turning to Iran, and diplomatic tensions between Washington and Tehran are intensifying following the collapse of talks and fresh threats around the Strait of Hormuz. Our A News correspondent Turar Shiralilu has more.
It's the 7th day of ceasefire between Iran, US and Israel, and I am reporting from downtown Tehran, where a large billboard reads, "The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed to Iran's enemies." The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has said that while excessive demands of the United States led to the failure of negotiations in Pakistan, Tehran is ready to continue the talks with Washington based on international law. He made this statement in a phone call with the French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. The Iranian chief executive also slammed the US threat of blockade of Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. In a related development, Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya Central Command seriously warned against threatening Iranian port security in the country's sovereign waters, saying no port in the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman will be safe. The spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Zulfaqari, said that port security in the region must either be for all countries or none of the parties will enjoy it. Also, Iran's Revolutionary Guards said that it will use new military capabilities if the Israeli-US war with Iran continues. Meantime, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone calls with his Omani, Saudi, Qatari, Egyptian and Russian counterparts. According to local media quoting foreign minister statements, their talks focus on the latest developments in the region, including possible Tehran-Washington renewed negotiations and the US naval blockade of Iranian ports. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is urging a diplomatic reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, warning that a military solution would be risky and difficult. His comments come as debate grows over how to secure the vital shipping route without escalating tensions further. Our correspondent has more.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Monday that the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened as soon as possible through diplomatic means. Speaking at a press event in Ankara, he warned that any military solution would be fraught with difficulties. Our position is to reopen the strait through peace, he told reporters, adding that no country wanted to be drawn into a war against Iran. Fidan noted that European countries had also expressed a reluctance to escalate the situation. He stressed that Turkey, too, wanted to remain outside the conflict while contributing to a diplomatic solution that would ensure the waterway remains open. He also warned that stability in the Persian Gulf cannot be achieved through military means, saying U.S. proposals for an armed force tasked with reopening the strait would face serious challenges. Fidan made the remarks as discussions continue over a proposal by U.S. President Donald Trump to create an international mechanism to secure shipping lanes. Fidan described the strait as a critical choke point, warning that continued disruptions affect not only energy markets, but also petrochemical supply chains and broader industrial production. The waterway handles roughly a fifth of all international oil shipments, making it vital to the global economy. Fidan said Turkey is not heavily dependent on the strait for its own energy needs. Nevertheless, he said, Turkey remains vulnerable to global price shocks caused by the waterway's continued closure. On the same day, Fidan held separate phone calls with his Russian and Saudi counterparts to discuss possible diplomatic solutions to the crisis. Details of those conversations, however, were not immediately made available. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
To Azerbaijan, and Baku has hosted a regional conference bringing together officials and delegates from across Asia to focus on the role of women in sustainable development. The discussions looked at how to strengthen participation, leadership and opportunities for women across key sectors.
Conference on interaction and confidence-building measures in Asia took place in Baku, bringing together delegates to discuss how to amplify women's voices for sustainable growth. Participants included officials not only from Azerbaijan, but also from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Mongolia and Cambodia.
The event opened with a welcome speech by Chairperson of the State Committee for Family, Women and Children Affairs, Bahar Muradova. Participants were then addressed by Vice President of the Heydar Aliyev Foundation and founder and head of the IDEA Public Union, Leyla Aliyeva.
Establishment of CICA Women Council is an important initiative, and I wish this platform every success in transforming meaningful ideas into actions. Azerbaijani chairmanship of CICA actively supports voices of women and in sustainable growth and decision-making. It will take around 120 years to achieve a full gender equality around the world. Only last year, women were around 50% of employed population in Azerbaijan.
CICA Secretary General Kairat Saribay also delivered remarks highlighting the importance of gender equality.
This is most important that the Women Council consists not only by the government representatives, but also by the representative of civil society. This is most important that governments do listen to the challenges and problems that are brought by civil organizations. So this is the dialogue. We do not provide only the platform for international dialogue, but we also provide the dialogue between the different stakeholders within the same nation, within the same community.
The conference included panel discussions on women's role in small and medium-sized businesses. Speakers also focused on opportunities in artificial intelligence and digitalization. Another key theme was women's leadership in environmental protection and sustainability.
The event also included the inaugural meeting of the SICA Women's Council. It was aimed at strengthening coordination, dialogue and the exchange of experience among member states. Sabina Bobikirova, A News.
It's now time for a break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility. Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
You're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So here are the key headlines. Trump hints Iran talks could resume this week as US port blockade continues. Israel and Lebanon hold first direct talks since 1993 with calls for a ceasefire. And Israeli strikes kill 11 in Gaza, including 2 children, medics say. Now let's take a look at the stories making the front pages this morning, and we head first to The Guardian and what Trump has been saying about Meloni, which is Italy's Prime Minister. Trump accuses ally Meloni of lacking courage for not joining attacks on Iran. Now, Donald Trump lashed out about this yesterday evening at one of his closest allies, saying Italy's Giorgia Meloni lacked courage in light of her failure to join the US in attacking Iran. His words were, "I'm shocked at her. I thought she had courage, but I was wrong," is what the US president said to an Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera. Now, the attack came as Meloni said that her far-right government would suspend the automatic renewal of its defense cooperation agreement with Israel in light of the current situation, and that's in light of the attacks in the Middle East. Now, Giorgia Meloni doesn't Trump has said Giorgia Meloni doesn't want to help us in the war, and that he was shocked that that was her actual position. In relation to that, Meloni has also spoken out about what Trump said in regards to the Pope, saying that he should not have criticised the Pope in that way, and was quite said that it was quite unacceptable in regards to that. She added that she would not feel comfortable in a society where religious leaders were expected to follow the direction of political leaders. So it's quite interesting that, as you can see, Meloni is standing there with Pope Leo, and now she's actually spoken out about the spat that President Donald Trump has had with the current Pope in regards to the war in Iran. So quite an interesting time. One of his key allies, and now he's not very happy with the position that Meloni has taken. Okay, now let's turn to the next headline making its way across this morning, and that's Al Jazeera and hundreds missing after Rohingya refugee boat capsizes in the Andaman Sea. Now, this was reported by the UN authorities, United Nations Refugee and Migration Agency, saying that Rohingya refugees and Bangladeshi nationals capsized along the sea. Now, the trawler, which had departed from Bangladesh, was heading for Malaysia and reportedly sank due to heavy winds, rough seas and overcrowding, as you can see there, that particular picture of what some of these trawlers look like when out on the sea. Now, the Bangladesh Coast Guard told AFP news agency that one of its ships rescued 9 people from the vessel on the 9th of April. However, it is unclear as to when or exactly how the boat actually capsized. Now, what we do know is that thousands of Rohingya Myanmar's population is persecuted. They are a Muslim minority, and they risk their lives every year trying to flee from repression and civil war in the country, and they often travel by sea using makeshift boats, fleeing across the border into Bangladesh since a deadly crackdown in 2017. However, the Rohingya community, who are primarily Muslim, are denied citizenships by the government of Myanmar, which is a Buddhist majority country. However, because of poor living conditions in Bangladesh, many have decided to continue their journey, and it's quite a precarious one, on overcrowded vessels to Malaysia to seek some form of refuge, which is a Muslim country in Malaysia, which is where they're trying to often get to, and that's exactly where this boat was trying to get to after it capsized, leaving from Bangladesh. Now we'll go to our next headline, and that's going to also be everywhere in regards to Iran and Lebanon. We go to the BBC, and Trump says talks could resume this week as Vance says US wants grand bargain with Iran. Now, just to give you some insight into this, we will go into further detail just because we have a report that will list exactly what all this means. But what Donald Trump has said is that talks could resume in Islamabad over the next couple of days. Pakistan have been working really hard as a chief mediator between the two countries to make sure some form of agreement is made, especially ahead of the ceasefire, which ends next week, Wednesday. But Trump was speaking to a New York Post reporter saying that it's likely to happen in the next couple of days. However, Pakistan said it may take a little bit longer than 2 days, but they are very much working to put something in place so that the two sides can come together and agree on something going forward, especially with causing an end to the current war in Iran. Now, Trump has actually praised Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, and said that he was doing a great job in arranging talks between the two sides. However, as I mentioned, it may take a little bit longer than just 2 days, as suggested by President Donald Trump. And because of that, oil prices have now continued to fall as those talks have raised hopes between the two countries and eased concerns about further disruptions to energy supplies in the Strait. And as you can see here, this particular picture of the Strait of Hormuz, we know that the US has now added a number of blockades, especially focusing on Iran's ports to make sure that nothing comes out of there, trying to put pressure on their economy by that. And we do know that one ship tried to sail through but had to reverse and turn around, and we believe that was one of China's vessels in regards to that. So whether or not that decision to blockade its ports is working seems to be doing the trick, but if it's having an impact, is completely something different, which we will dig further into. And just very quickly, also in relation to Lebanon talks, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in later on in the program, they held their first talks, Lebanon and Israel, together in more than over 3 decades in order to find out how they can end the fighting. Now, Israel wants to make sure that all Iran-backed Hezbollah groups are disarmed, and Lebanon wants an immediate ceasefire. We know that the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there to help mediate the two talks between the countries and said that this was actually a historic opportunity to end Hezbollah's influence in the region and hopefully go for a peace agreement between the two countries. Now let's head over to our report that has more of an in-depth overview as to what is happening in relation to the US and Iran talks as well as Lebanon.
US President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that talks with Iran could resume in Pakistan within the next 2 days. This follows the collapse of weekend negotiations, which led Washington to impose a blockade on Iranian ports. US Vice President J.D. Vance also pointed to progress, but said deep mistrust between Washington and Tehran would take time to overcome.
Look, honestly, after 49 years, there's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. And I know the President of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. So you never know, though.
He added that Iranian negotiators appeared willing to reach an agreement and said he felt very good about where we are. Iran has not yet responded to Trump's remarks. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said the country remains compliant with international law and highlighted growing instability in the Middle East.
There is now a problem in the Persian Gulf, and the world has been thrown into turmoil. This has had an impact across the world. People are dissatisfied and have raised their voices. But we ourselves are in the midst of this turmoil, and despite all these pressures, our work is progressing properly.
The comments come as the US military said no ships had passed through the American-enforced blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas in the first 24 hours of the operation. Late on Tuesday, it said US forces had completely halted maritime trade into and out of Iran.
Israel and Lebanon have held direct talks in Washington, D.C. in a meeting hosted by the United States. The discussions come in the middle of rising regional tensions and ongoing conflict, marking a notable attempt to open a path toward further negotiations.
The United States hosted rare direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in Washington, D.C., marking a significant diplomatic moment between two countries that have technically been at war for decades. The meeting comes at a critical point in the Middle East crisis, just 1 week into a fragile ceasefire involving the United States, Israel and Iran. Chaired by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the talks brought together Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter and Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh. Israel is demanding the disarmament of Hezbollah and the dismantling of its infrastructure, while Lebanon is calling for an immediate ceasefire and urgent steps to address a worsening humanitarian crisis. Officials say the talks lasted more than 2 hours. The US State Department described the discussions as productive, with agreement to move toward direct negotiations. Rubio called the meeting a historic opportunity to address long-standing tensions.
We're very honored to be joined by two countries that the United States wants to have strong relations with. very happy to serve in this facilitating role. This is a historic opportunity. We understand we're working against decades of history and complexities that have led us to this unique moment. And the opportunity here, I know some of you are shouting questions about ceasefires. This is a lot more than just about that. This is about bringing a permanent end to 20 or 30 years of Hezbollah's influence in this part of the world, and not just the damage it's inflicted on Israel, the damage it's inflicted on the Lebanese people. We have to remember the Lebanese people are victims of Hezbollah.
Israel emphasized its security concerns.
We made it very clear that the security of our civilians is not up for negotiation. That is understood by the government of Joseph Aoun. And I must say, this was a victory for sanity, for responsibility, and for peace. Because the head of Hezbollah warned the government of Lebanon yesterday not to participate in these talks. And the government of Joseph Aoun bravely said no to Hezbollah. And this is the beginning of a very strong and fortified, consistent battle against Hezbollah. They are weakened as they've never been, and together we'll continue to rid the threat of this Iranian proxy, which is so malign and so malignant in the region.
Despite diplomatic progress, violence continues on the ground. A fire lit up the sky in Tyre following a reported Israeli strike. Lebanese authorities say dozens have been killed in recent attacks as tensions remain high.
Staying on the conflict in the Middle East, we're going to take a deeper look at the air power versus resilience and why Iran has so far survived Western strikes. Despite sustained US and Israeli airstrikes, Iran retains its missile arsenal, hardened infrastructure and strategic leverage in the Strait of Hormuz, exposing the limits of air power in modern warfare. Joining me now to further dig into this is Umar Aslam, founder and CEO of Global Defense Insight, co-founder and CEO of West Asia Watch. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
My first question in regards to what's going on right now in the Middle East, what does the current situation tell us about Iran's military capabilities? And if there is no peace deal, could the fighting continue after the ceasefire?
Well, thank you so much for having me. The situation suggests Iran still retains meaningful military capability, especially in terms of missiles, drones, air defense layers, proxy networks, and the ability to impose cost indirectly. But it also shows the Iran's limits in terms of against a technologically superior opponent with a stronger air power, intelligence, and maritime reach. Iran's strength is not conventional dominance. It is endurance, dispersion, and escalation management. If no peace deal is reached, fighting could resume after, you can say, 2 days, 3 days, as Trump announced today that they are again going to start a war with the Iran. So we can see a lot of missile exchange in the region, proxy activity, as well as cyber operations, as well as the cyber attacks on the Iranian infrastructure, as well as Israeli and Americans. Thank you.
And we've just seen some news sites actually reporting new satellite images showing Iran has been digging for missile launches trapped underground in the middle of their ceasefire. Is that a good sign or a sign that they need more of the missiles that has now gone underground? What does that actually tell us?
Well, it can point to both things, as well as the damage control, as well as the force preservation. On one hand, recovering launchers or missile systems from underground bases as sites shows that the Iran is trying to restore its operational readiness after strikes. But it also suggests that the pressure on its existing launcher inventory to need to you can say that they are adding more missiles into that storage. So this shows both things, and as well as basically it's not automatically a good sign. It may instead shows resilience under stress. Iran is trying to reconstitute its deterrent while also revealing that parts of that deterrent have been disrupted.
Do you think that the blockade to Iran's ports by the US is that negatively impacting Iran in this fight? Will this put pressure on Tehran to come to a compromise in regards to agreement between the US?
Any sustained disruption to Iranian ports will likely hurt logistics, trade flows, insurance costs, energy exports, and military resupply. This thing creates actually the economic as well as political pressure on the Iranian economy and Iranian government. It also complicate the import routes for dual-use materials as well as sustain domestic confidence. So this thing is hurtling Iran a lot. Their exports are much reduced. Their oil exports and all other exports are very much reduced, as well as their logistic is very much disturbed. We have also saw that they are importing the drone parts via land routes because their sea routes are blocked, and as well as this thing basically a blockade could raise pressure on Tehran. But whether it produces compromise depends on how severe it is, how long it lasts, and whether Iran sees an acceptable diplomatic off-ramp, such as we are seeing the peace talks in Islamabad.
Yes, which is exactly where you are right now. So we'll hopefully get a new date as to when these peace talks take place. But just on what you said in regards to the pressure that the US is putting on Tehran, they seem to now been able to, up their game. The US seem to be losing this particular fight, and now that they've blockaded some of Iran's ports, is now putting pressure on Tehran. What would you say is Iran's overall strategy then in regards to their military might? Do they keep defending and attacking US bases if no agreement is made, or do you think it will lead to a ceasefire because the US has blocked its ports?
I think Iran's overall strategy is usually based on the deterrence through attrition, survive, absorb the Israeli and American attacks, then retaliate selectively and avoid total war while keeping the multiple pressure points active. This is what Iran is doing right now, and this is what we saw in last 40-50 days. So basically Iran tries to combine direct missile and drone strikes along with the regional partner networks. For example, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the other organizations, as well as the Iraqi militia in the Iraq. So Iran is currently doing. Iran is trying multiple pressure points active. So Iran is also trying to disrupt the maritime, maritime traffic and political signaling. So this is what Iran is going to show, and this is what Iran is politically signaling to its partners as well as Iran and Israel, USA and Israel. So basically, Iran likely have enough capability to, continue limited as well as continue these kind of strikes, missile strikes as well as drone strikes and allied groups. But sustaining a prolonged high-intensity confrontation would be much more harder for Iranian economy. It's a challenge for Iranian ammunition expenditure as well as infrastructure vulnerability and the weakening of theaters. Lebanon matters a lot, and if Hezbollah is constrained by the ceasefire dynamics or damage to Lebanese infrastructure, Iran loses a major layer of its regional leverage. More broadly, if allies are weakened and supply chains are hurt, so basically Iran's deterrence networks become narrower as well as more costly to maintain. So that's the Iran's overall strategy right now, and that's how Iran is trying to keep the active, you can say that they are pressure points active.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you, Mr. Aslam, for explaining that. We'll definitely be keeping close watch in the next few days as to how this blockade actually puts pressure on Tehran and negotiations that will hopefully be in Islamabad in the next few days. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Industries across the continent are being pushed to adapt as supply disruptions continue amid the ongoing Middle East tensions. The interruption is driving a shift towards alternative materials and energy solutions that could reshape business long after the crisis ends. Let's take a look at this.
Rising tensions in the Middle East are rippling through global supply chains, hitting industries far beyond the region. Plastic shortages linked to disrupted oil supplies have forced manufacturers to scale back production in South Korea. At one packaging factory, operations have slowed dramatically as raw materials become harder to secure.
The most tangible change we're feeling is the rise in raw material prices and delays in supply, which have put us in a position where we can't manufacture our products.
The disruption has left production lines stalled, with companies warning of mounting losses.
Due to severe delays, production has effectively come to a halt, resulting in revenue losses.
But the shortage is also accelerating a shift toward alternatives. Demand for paper-based packaging has surged as companies look to reduce reliance on plastic.
As plastic supplies have tightened due to the US-Iran situation, inquiries for paper-based alternatives have increased threefold. Approximately 70% of the demand is for paper tubes used in sunscreens, essences, and lotions, followed by paper sticks and pouches.
Industry leaders say the trend could continue, driven by both supply pressures and sustainability goals. Meanwhile, in Australia, the same crisis is reshaping another sector, transport. With diesel prices rising sharply, interest in electric trucks is gaining momentum.
Yeah, so the current fuel crisis has been very good for us, and we've seen a massive uptick in interest from governments around the world, from customers around the world, and from customers here in Australia. So it's been really good from that perspective. And the economics of running an electric truck were beneficial before the fuel crisis, but now it's obviously a million times cheaper to run an electric truck than a diesel truck.
Companies are increasingly turning to electric freight solutions, seeing them as both cost-effective and more resilient to global shocks.
Electric heavy road freight is possible today, and not only is it possible, it's capable of operating at a lower cost than diesel freight, and it's capable of higher productivity than diesel freight as well. So in addition to these two major economic factors, it also enables us to decouple our road freight system from volatile global oil markets and essentially onshore our energy, our transport energy production here in Australia.
The impact is being felt far beyond the region, driving changes that could have lasting consequences for how industries operate worldwide.
Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip has killed at least 11 Palestinians on Tuesday. That's according to local officials. The attacks have deepened tensions despite an ongoing ceasefire deal. Among the dead were children, including a 3-year-old boy killed in a strike targeting a police vehicle in Gaza, and another child killed in the north near Jabalia. Israel has not yet commented on these incidences. The violence continues, with both sides blaming each other for the escalation. Staying on the conflict in the Middle East, Italy has suspended the automatic renewal of its defence cooperation agreement with Israel. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni confirmed on Tuesday. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said the decision reflects the current situation, as her government has recently criticised Israeli strikes in Lebanon. The agreement, originally signed in 2003, has been automatically renewed every 5 years since 2006. Israel's foreign ministry has not commented. Peru has extended its presidential and congressional elections into a second day after major ballot delivery failures in the capital, Lima. Meanwhile, EU observers have rejected claims of fraud but say serious logistical problems disrupted the vote.
Peru's National Office of Electoral Process extended presidential and congressional elections into a second day Monday after a private contractor failed to deliver ballots to dozens of polling stations across Lima, preventing more than 52,000 citizens from voting on time. Meanwhile, European Union election observers on Tuesday dismissed allegations of fraud in Peru's presidential election, while acknowledging the vote was marred by significant logistical failures that left thousands of citizens unable to cast their ballots.
We have not found objective elements to support the narrative of fraud having concrete elements at this stage. It is clear that there have been serious problems, as we have said. The fact that 13 electoral centres were unable to vote and that they spent all day waiting with much frustration.
Conservative presidential candidate Rafael López Aliaga also said he will still call for new elections during a protest with supporters in front of the electoral authority.
Members of the National Jury of Elections, we are giving you a deadline. You have 24 hours to declare this garbage null and void. To those missions from the European Union and the OAS that have come to Peru, get out of Peru once and for all.
Early results, with more than 70% of ballots counted, show right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori leading with approximately 16%, though a June 7th runoff is virtually assured given that no candidate is expected to surpass the 50% threshold required to win outright.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. We're going to a quick break, so make sure you don't go anywhere. Told you it was a short break, so welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now we head over to Europe, and diplomatic efforts related to Ukraine are intensifying. Against this backdrop, European countries are signing new agreements on defence and financial support for the country. For more, we go to our A News correspondent, Anita Sharma, who has this.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Ukraine deepens defense ties as Russian strikes continue to hit cities on the ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky was welcomed in Berlin Tuesday with a military reception and a meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Then, a number of cooperation agreements were signed on defense and reconstruction, including a large-scale joint drone production deal. Merz said the partnership would strengthen both Kyiv's war effort and Europe's defense industry, with plans to supply thousands of drones and expand air defense, including Patriot missiles and Iris-T systems. Zelensky called the drone deal potentially one of the largest in Europe, highlighting Ukraine's battlefield-driven innovation as a growing pillar of European security. Zelensky then traveled to Oslo, where a parallel deal was unveiled to co-produce Ukrainian drones both in Ukraine and Norway. Under that agreement, Kyiv will share frontline data and expertise, while Norway will boost production capacity. The Norwegian Prime Minister said Europe must learn directly from Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression. Today, Zelensky will meet the Italian Prime Minister in Rome. Giorgia Meloni has strongly backed Ukraine, but is now facing growing domestic and geopolitical pressures. This as the wider Middle East crisis drives energy and security concerns across the bloc. Meanwhile, a political shift in Hungary could unlock critical funding. After a call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Hungary's new leader, Peter Magyar, signaled swift work ahead, raising expectations that Budapest will drop its opposition to a €90 billion EU loan for Ukraine, a key financial lifeline. But the war remains very real on the ground. Ukrainian officials say a Russian strike on the city of Dnipro killed at least 5 civilians and injured dozens. A very stark reminder that even as diplomacy accelerates, the conflict continues to exact a very heavy toll. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now to central Bangladesh, and a centuries-old Hindu festival is drawing crowds with red-painted performers, music and a message of renewal as villagers from different communities come together to celebrate the Bengali New Year.
In a village in central Bangladesh, dole drums, trumpets and clarinets ring out as the annual Lau Kach festival begins, marking the end of the Bengali year. Men are covered head to toe in vivid red paint as they become the red glass army of Mahadeva, or Lord Shiva, before parading through the streets.
This celebration is called Chaitra Sankranti, the last day of the Bengali month of Chaitra. We hold 2 parades on this day. In the morning session, Mahadeva and Parvati dance and sing, and then in the afternoon, Mahadeva comes out with his red glass army and parade across the village.
Villagers say the procession is meant to drive away misfortune and welcome a better start to the new year. A priest leads the parade with holy smoke, while red-painted men carrying swords move through the village as residents walk beside them and watch from the roadside. The celebration draws people from across the village, including Muslim residents who come to watch and take part in a tradition they say belongs to the whole community.
This is a very ancient festival in our village, deeply rooted in the cultural heritage of Bikrampur. This is the only place where Mahadeva and the Red Glass Army worship takes place. It is very popular, and Hindus and Muslims gather here to enjoy it together.
As the day ends, performers dance on in a temple field at sunset, closing the celebration with colour, music and a sense of renewal.
Very colourful indeed. They look more orangey than red, but either way, I'm sure they've enjoyed celebrating their new year. Well, that's been the Daybreak session for this morning. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow morning to bring you the latest updates, but make sure you stay tuned to A News for further information throughout the day. Take care.